So what are these disturbances that we see within communities? We have three different categories that we could talk about. We could talk about physical disturbances, right? So these are non-living factors. And so they could include storms like hurricanes. They could include floods. Winds in the storm also can cause a disturbance if it causes the trees to blow down and then in the middle of the forest, and then you get light coming in, and then that part of the forest is going to have different plants in it because of that. Even droughts can be disturbances because it could cause die-off of a particular species. We could even talk about volcanic eruptions. So eruptions. So for example, lava flows, right? Sets the succession back to zero. So that means that we need to have plants that can colonize those really harsh environments like a volcanic lava flow, right? And then create new conditions for other species to arise. So these are some examples of, and fires. So that is something you are going to explore, the fires. We can also talk about biological disturbances. So a big one is grazing. So when you bring animals in and you graze the habitat, that is a major disturbance. And so, for example, like bringing goats in to graze the river, that is the area, the riparian zone around the river, that is a major disturbance. And then the plant communities have to rebound from that disturbance. Grazing, we could also talk about disease. So plants have diseases, but so do animals. So we could talk about community and succession in animal communities. And then we could also talk about predation. So these are biological because they're caused by living things. Then we could talk about human disturbances. So agriculture. So plowing grasslands, like native grasslands, is going to be a major disturbance to that ecosystem. And you know, even from your own, maybe your yard, when you clear the grass to create a garden or a garden bed, you know that that is a major disturbance and weeds are going to pop up in that area, right? So you have created a disturbance and now you actually have to put energy into either eliminating the weeds, maybe getting past the weedy species, the weedy portion, and actually planting yourself some perennials that will outcompete the weeds. And so we all know about, I think most of us know about agricultural disturbances, and specifically in our yards. And mining. So if you have a mine where you have put the tailings on the ground, some of those are toxic tailings. And we do have some interesting plant animals plants that can actually colonize the mine tailings. Super interesting. And then obviously logging. So this is really important when we're talking about restoration of an ecosystem. And what were the normal disturbances in an ecosystem? What is the community that tends to persist for extended periods of time? And are there things that we can do to make that ecosystem, quote unquote, healthier, maybe more stable? So with logging, clear cutting, rather than selectively removing trees, creates a massive disturbance, right? And so oftentimes it takes a long time for a forest to overcome that disturbance. It's a spatial disturbance that is big. Whereas if you're going in and you're just selectively removing trees here and there, right, for selectively logging, selectively thinning the forest, then that is going to be less of a disturbance. So disturbances are interesting because some communities have actually evolved mechanisms to deal with predictable disturbances. So if you have a disturbance that's very predictable, then that is a selective pressure, natural selection, and is going to select for animals and plants that are able to withstand that level of disturbance. So it's interesting to also note that disturbances are not just in terrestrial ecosystems, but they are also in aquatic ecosystems. So for example, you could have a massive die-off of coral, and that is going to completely change that ecosystem. You could have storms that damage reefs. You could also even talk about disturbances of nutrient pollution in the water. That is a disturbance, and that how does the plant and animal communities deal with these aquatic disturbances is significant.